before we get to the stitching part and even start simulating, we also need to create a waistband, which we will do with the help of the top and the internal lines tool. The internal lines are, as the name would suggest, meant for placing internal lines within our patterns, for pockets or let's say any other accessories we might need. But they can also be used for cutting holes or separating our patterns. So if I select the internal polygon tool and zoom in to my front pattern of the top, and let's just create a line right here. Once you get to the end, just double click. And I also want to create a line in the back. So let's zoom into the back pattern and create a similar line. There we go. Now we're going to use the 3D window to align this. So of course, I positioned the internal lines in the back a bit too high up. So I'm going to select them with my Edit Pattern tool and push them a bit more down. Even more so. Let's also check if the points are dragged to the very end, making sure that they're intersecting the pattern. And I think we can push them maybe a tiny bit down. There we go. Now they're aligned, the front and the back. Now once I have this, I can simply select the line, right-click, and I have two options available, cutting or cutting and sewing. And the cut option, what it does, it's simply going to separate this pattern as a rectangle by itself. But since I want the top to be connected with the waistband, I'm going to select the cut and sew option. So once I do that, if I go to the Edit Sewing tool, you can see that it not only separates the rectangle as a separate piece, but it also sews it back together, so we don't have any work to do at all. And I'm going to do the same for the back pattern. Select the internal line, right-click, and go Cut and Sew. But since I don't need the waistband to be separated into 4 rectangles, I'm also going to merge the front 2 and the back 2 together. So I'm going to select this line in the middle, right-click, and select Merge. Sometimes this process may delete the seam lines. That's why I always check if they're still there with the Edit Sewing tool. Okay, so let's do the same as we did for the back pattern. Right-click and go Merge. Okay, and now we've created a waistband that is made up of 2 rectangles, the front and the back. And now we can begin by stitching everything together. So we're going to take our segment sewing tool, because when I look at the shorts, all I see are very simple lines that I would like to connect. So for instance, let's start with the obvious. I would like to connect the front pieces in the middle. So let's do that. And of course the back pieces together. There we go. I would also like to connect the front side piece with this. Don't forget to observe the blue dot if you're not sure on how to stitch this together. And also between her legs, I would like to stitch this with this side. So that with this one. And as you can see, the seam lines are going straight. Now I also need to connect the shorts part with the waistband. And that shouldn't be too hard since I still have a point right here. So I can simply just sew this front pattern to this part of the waistband. And I can do that simply by clicking the two together and connecting them. And same goes for the other side. And here I have the same. The back pattern with this side of the waistband and the other with this part of the waistband. And if I quickly take a look, I see that everything is fine, but before I start simulating, I'm also going to freeze some patterns. Freezing is a very good idea once your outfit is getting a bit more complex, and like in our case when we're adding more pieces of the garment. So once I start simulating, the newly made seam lines are going to start pulling everything including the top, so I would like to secure its position. So I'm just going to select all of this, including the waistband. So be sure to select the waistband as well. Right click and select freeze, which is right here. And everything is sort of bluish, which indicates that we froze it. And now let's simulate by pressing spacebar. Alright, now that this is done, I can unfreeze the top part to see how everything falls. Right click and unfreeze. For the waistband as well. Now we can begin by readjusting the shorts. I think they're a little bit too long and of course too tight on her. So I'm going to take my edit pattern tool and grab the side lines of the front and back and try to make the shorts more loose on her. And maybe shorter as well. I would also want these ends to be a bit more upwards and a little more sticking out than the rest of the fabric. There we go. I think we can afford to make them a bit more looser. And that's a bit too much now, so let's go back with Ctrl and Z and let's try to move the lines only a tiny bit. So you see, with editing patterns, every millimeter counts, and you can really spend a lot of time tweaking the details and observing the changes in the 3D window and getting the final effect that you want. But since we're not going for anything specific in this module, we will leave them at this stage and change them later. Right now, everything can seem a bit off, but of course we would like the garment to have smoother wrinkles or possibly have even more wrinkles, and even the combination of a sweater and shorts doesn't go well together. But this was meant as a preparation for the next module, where we will start using MD's tools with intent and generating specific results, and with that bringing our outfit together. So we started with this, but we will end with something completely different with the use of tools mentioned in this module and new ones as well. See you there!